Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Blumenthal. Thanks for your leadership and for putting together this really important hearing. As you know, both Senator Blumenthal and I have been supporting each other and leading bills in this area for years. I have the bill to prevent abusive dating partners and convicted stalkers from buying a gun. Provisions of that bill were actually included in the House bill to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, for which 29 Republicans voted for it. But when the bill came to the Senate, we were unable to get the Republican votes, honestly, to include it in the final bill. And that was more than disappointing, but the rest of the provisions in the bill were very, very important. And we have not, by one iota, given up on these bills. And I guess I'd start with you, Ms. Mason. I want to thank you for your courage in coming forward, telling your story, your sister's story. As someone from a family that has experienced domestic violence, could you talk about how important it is that addressing gun violence should be part of the federal government's efforts to help victims? And I know how hard it is to tell your own stories, but I would believe that a lot of the motivation for you in telling the story is to make sure it doesn't happen to other people again. Go ahead, Ms. Mason.
Yeah, I always say that I tell my story because I never want another sister in my shoes because it's life-changing. So I just think having this bill and having another layer of protection for someone when we know under a temporary restraining order, those 2 weeks, everything is very heated still. It's a very an unstable time, when a marriage is ending or when there's violence and there's a need to get the restraining order. It's such a crazy time for those 2 weeks. So I just think having another layer of protection would just be so beneficial and can save lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Valente, in 2014, this is how long we've been trying to pass these bills, the Judiciary Committee under Senator Grassley's and Leahy's leadership held a hearing on my bill, and one of the Republican witnesses was a sheriff from Racine, Wisconsin, who was a self-described conservative Republican, but he testified actually in favor of closing this loopholes. And he said this: dangerous boyfriends can be just as scary as dangerous husbands. They hit just as hard and they fire their guns with the same deadly force. In fact, we know that approximately half of intimate partner homicides in the U.S. are committed by dating partners. Can you say more about the connection that we've seen between gun violence and domestic violence? And we know 33 states have taken action, and how those changes helped in this regard.
Yes, thank you. Research has shown in the states where they have taken these steps and changed the law in this manner, that there has been a reduction in homicides. Again, I've submitted some of those studies in the materials that we handed in yesterday, and we encourage you to look at them. They really back this up, knowing that over time, since the passage of the first Violence Against Women Act, when more domestic violence cases involved married or formerly married couples, and now where more people who seek protection orders are in dating relationships that are not covered by this, it's really important that the Violence Against Women Act provisions are updated and the firearms provisions are updated. As a matter of fact, for the rest of the Violence Against Women Act, dating violence has been added. It's been added since 2006.
Exactly.
Yes, and so
yet this critical piece of it, it hasn't been. And I still remember back in 2014 at that hearing, all the Republican witnesses actually agreed, not on the whole bill, but they agreed on the the dating partner piece of it. And so that's why this has been so frustrating. One last question. In your testimony, you point out that 20% of intimate partner homicide victims are someone other than the intimate partner: children, other family members, law enforcement responders, bystanders. I still remember a horrible case in Lake City, Minnesota, where a police officer who had just been with his family for the Christmas nativity show with the 3 children. He responds to a domestic violence scene, shot in the head, killed. And next time he's in church after the nativity play, is as a victim of homicide at his own funeral with his family walking down that aisle. I was there. I won't forget that. But the other thing that people don't always think about, in addition to the statistic you put forward, is also that kids that witness domestic violence often end up in the system themselves because they grow up with this kind of violence. I had outside of my office when I was DA a picture that showed a woman holding a baby with a Band-Aid over the baby's nose, and it said, the woman had a Band-Aid over her nose, but she's holding the baby, and it said, "Beat your wife and it's your kid that will go to jail," to make that point. Do you want to comment on those two things, the problem with children in a home witnessing violence, and then also the fact that other people are often killed by domestic violence perpetrators?
Yes, there's a lot of information that can back this up. A lot of law enforcement organizations have tracked this, and we can get that information to you if you like. It is a very high percentage of law enforcement who are subjected to, accompanying damage when an abuser is behaving in the way that, in a violent way with a firearm. There are people who, neighbors have been caught up in this, friends. Somebody will leave, and a survivor will leave and stay in someone's house, and that person is at risk. Parents, as you've heard, are at risk when they offer shelter to their children. And as for children, witnessing this, watching that terrorism has a terrible generational effect. I also want to point out that in one of the things that we look for when we worry about lethality is we ask, has he threatened to kill the children too? Because these threats, "I'll kill you with this firearm," are often extended to the children in the household as well.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Blumenthal.